Okay, well, make a start, I think. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for Robin online. It looks like we've got Jason Baker online as well. I'm John Bailey, the chair of the committee. And thank you for sparing the time on a very hot day with I've been told, no air conditioning in this building. I don't think we have any members of the public online or here. The only thing I'd like you to do is just perhaps, as we've got new people here, and welcome to Stephen, who's subbing for Francis. So perhaps if we just go around the room and introduce ourselves, just for Stephen's purpose, if nothing else. I'm chair of the committee, Martok, councillor. So I'll pass on. I'll take in the officers as well.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Taylor. I'm in Democratic Services.
Thanks, Chair. I'm Alan Hemsley, co-opted member living in Carhampton.
David Strip from Kingston St Mary, co-opted member as well.
Stephen Pugsley. I'm one of the two members for Exmoor, deputising for the other one this afternoon. Francis unfortunately can't be here, and I have in a past life been chairman of standards at Exmoor National Park.
Thank you very much.
Hugh Davis. I represent Williton Watchet, Stamford Bratton, all the way to Stagursey. Thank you.
Shall we, Robin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, Robin Horton, live in Shepton Mallet, or just outside on my small holding, co-opted member.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew Melhewish from Democratic Services.
And David Clark, Service Director for Governance, Democratic and Legal, and the Monitoring Officer.
Thank you all. I think we're expecting Paul Hooper. Have we got any apologies from him?
No apologies from Paul Hooper, but we have apologies, Chairman, from Councillor Brian Smedley, Councillor Martin Dimmery, and Councillor Francis Nicholson, who's obviously been substituted by Councillor Pugsley.
Thank you, Steve. The papers have been published on the council's website in advance of the meeting. So I kindly request that the members and officers refer to page numbers in the agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. We're running as a hybrid format with committee members and key officers physically present. Other elected members may operate remotely. I think we've got Jason Baker there. Please only speak in terms of conventions when the chair's invitation. Switch the microphone on your desk, say your name before speaking, and switch the microphone off after speaking. If I could ask you also to switch your phones off, please. Declarations of interest. Any to declare? Thank you. Question time.
No members of the public have registered to speak, Chairman.
Thanks, Steve. You've all had copies of the previous minutes, and I'd like to run through the action plan as well. Have you all had a chance to look through the minutes? And have you any comments on those?
There was one action point. Mrs. Wellman's document comparing the code of conduct was going to be redistributed. I don't know if it came. Did that come through?
I haven't seen it.
No, I haven't seen it. I think I had. But it might be used. It's a useful document when we come on to talk about that later. It's a useful document to share.
Keep an action plan going as we go through so that we can capture these points. Let me just pick that one up, David. We take that as matters arising. What was the document exactly, David? Comparing Well, I don't think we'll pick it up now. It's not been, if you'd circulate, Alan, unless that wants to be done by officers.
If you can include officers, so they've got a copy for the
Okay.
for the minutes, then we can, happy for you to distribute now.
Thank you, Alan. So there are no other comments on the minutes of the last meeting? All accepted? Thank you. Oh, Hugh. Okay, if you'd like to propose,
Yeah, I propose, I'm happy with them. Okay.
I'm happy to second them. So let's work our way through the action plan. The first item was to clarify officer support, and I think David might be able to do that now on a verbal basis.
Yep, so our committee officer is Steve Taylor. Our committee manager is Andrew Mulhewish. I'll be lead officer in terms of support for the committee as service director and MO. If there is the need for any legal support within the meetings, then we have access to lawyers. We had Steve Hellard and Leslie Dolan attend to the last meeting, and they can attend upon request as well.
Everybody happy that's clear now? Thank you. The next action was the P1 working group to review documents. That's coming up in the agenda. Chair to brief Councillor Nicholson, which I've done. P2 have met as action 4. And then P3 was the monitoring officer to respond to current P3 amendments, and that's on the agenda as well. Full council to ask to amend constitution of Councillor Smedley to be nominated. That was done. Membership of the hearing subcommittee, that's on the agenda. And the co-opted vacancy, job spec 2 committee. I think that was just if anybody, I've not seen that. David, you want
No, apologies, Chair. I don't think that's been actioned yet. We can get that done.
If you remember, the point of that was that we may have amongst our contacts somebody who may be interested in picking that role up. Okay, so that's the action plan. Let's move on to priority group. Priority group 1, item 5, pages 17 to 92. And perhaps I just give a bit of background, because David and I have had a few conversations. Well, firstly, thanks to Steve Hellard for feeding back on that. I was not personally aware of any previous correspondence, so I was building on this from a different perspective. And so that's really taken account of the work that we did in P1 back in our meeting on the 10th of May. So I will just ask David to present the report, please.
No problem, Chair. Yep. So this is the work of P1, looking at the Code of Conduct's complaint process. So there's three documents that were shared with the priority group. So there was the draft investigations and hearing procedures, Somerset Council guidance on making a Code of Conduct complaint, which included the process flowchart, and the draft Somerset Council Code of Conduct complaints media protocol, which just sets out how and when we will respond to media inquiries regarding the complaints process. So the group reviewed those three documents, made a number of comments that were recorded via track changes. Those documents are now within the appendices to the cover report, which includes the comments and Steve Hellard as legal advisor's response to those comments, notifying or noting where changes have been agreed and adopted, and if not, why not. So that's the priority group have reviewed it. The officers have reviewed their review, and it's now presented back to the committee to consider whether they agree that it's in a suitable state now to put forward for adoption. So that is the recommendation, that the committee now agree to recommend to full council the adoptions of those three elements of the process.
Thank you, David. I propose that in terms of working our way through these, we take the three elements separately. The large document commented on by Steve Hallard, the investigation hearing procedure. Secondly, the code of conduct complaint, including the flow chart, which David did. And thirdly, the media protocol. So starting with the first one, that was sent round to everybody. And with Steve Hallard's comments along the side, as Dave has just identified. Are there any issues that you'd like to raise on that document? If we take it page by page, if we need to, then we'll do that. If not, we'll take it as a whole. David?
No, for me, I think, to be fair, a lot of those comments were Alan's. If Alan's happy with the responses, then I'm fine. Yeah. And so, some of them were sort of technical, just small points about the names and whatever. So a lot of those are fine. I think, no, I'd be interested to hear Alan's feedback.
Yeah. Amendments that Steve's made. Sorry for that, Robin. I didn't have switched on. So, Alan, your thoughts? Okay, thank you, Alan. Stephen. Okay, and Hugh.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't doubt anything to be different to what we've asked. That man has done a first-class job for us.
Yes, thank you, Alan. The work of the P1 group was very much simpler than it could have otherwise been if we didn't have your cockshy to throw rocks at, and it's not a very good position to be in that, but it does make it very much easier for everybody else. So what I'm going to propose is then that we adopt the Code of Conduct and Investigation Hearing Procedures, which is Appendix 1, page 22 onwards. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Steve. Agreed? Let's then move on to Appendix 2, the Code of Conduct for Councils, Information Guidance for Potential Claimants. I'll reverse the process this time and start with Stephen about any comments or queries that one has on Appendix 2.
And I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that the work that's been done on this seems to be absolutely fine. Having seen other documents of a similar nature elsewhere, I would have said this was exemplary.
Thanks, Stephen. Hugh.
Likewise, Chair. Agree with Stephen. Thank you.
And I forgot, apologies, Robin, on the first run round. So have you got any comments on Appendix 2 or the comments that the amendments that Steve Hellard has suggested?
Yeah, no, nothing to add, Chair. No, nothing to add from the amendments, no. Thank
you. Alan? David? Okay, right. Well, I propose, if I may, let's have somebody else. Somebody else like to propose that Stephen proposes. Do I have a seconder? All agreed? And thank you again for all concerned in those documents. I think this pre-work, if we can get it as early as possible, really helps with the process of these meetings going forward. Then we can focus on the future.
Can I just clarify, Chair? There was 2 complaints against council's process flow charts. Was there a particular one?
I was just going to move on to those, Steve. And particularly I was interested in, but thank you for reminding me of that. These were moving on to page 85 and 87. then this was a schematic that David Strip spent quite a lot of time on, and to good purpose as well, in making sure that the schematic or the process worked very well, and that it would be simple for someone to pick up and read. And I think he achieved both those, but we do have two versions. I'll just ask David perhaps to comment, as he's been the one that's done the work, on the document overall, and which one of the two versions you feel was most suitable.
Okay, thank you. So the background to this is that the first schematic was designed around the old code of conduct, whatever, and then it's been the old complaints process rather, and then this version, the first version here that you see is Appendix 3, was followed the same pattern. So it was in stages. It followed the stages of the process. So I mean, hopefully it's fairly clear. Comes in day one. We specifically tried to put timeframes around the actions as well, so that people could understand, you know, where the time limits were, if there were time limits there at all. And so hopefully that's sort of fairly self-explanatory. I think the reason for the second version was that Councillor Francis Nicholson at the last meeting said that she sort of expected to see more of a flow chart in terms of yes or no. You know, if this happens, then this happens and whatever. So the second version has tried to do that. But still, I think it still needs to follow the sort of stages of the process. So stage one is the initial assessment, preliminary inquiries, investigation, hearing. And then, you know, alongside that, there are then, you know, the level 1 complaints, the informal resolution, and level 2 complaints. So it's just tried to précis what is whatever it is, how many page documents into a schematic with the key actions and points. To be honest, in terms of which version you choose, which you think is clearer, I don't have any strong preference. I think the first version sort of looks tidier, sets it out neater, gives a few explanatory notes and definitions in the bottom corner. But honestly, I'm not precious about which version you use. If you think that both, you know, the second version is clearer, then fine. And I can, you know, what I tried to do initially in the first version with the colour scheme was try to reflect the new colour code of the new council. I couldn't actually find the, you know, the
teal.
Yeah, whatever it is. So, you know, I mean, I can change those. I mean, I can add colours to either of them if you want a colour document, but whatever. So whatever you think, I don't mind. I mean, if there are any technical points, I think this went through the legal department and they made some comments. So we did change some things. I think Alan made some comments last time about councillors and members and whatever. So hopefully those have all been clarified. I think one point, yes, the final column, it says publication of the decision following a hearing. Publication of the decision and outcomes will be in accordance with the media protocol. And that was the point that the legal team made, said should be phrased because there are too many options there and it's easier to just say according to the media protocol. So, I mean, I'm not, if you were looking at this as how does this process work? Having to refer to the media process is sort of a bit, doesn't really capture it, I don't think. But if there are seriously too many options as to what happens in terms of publication of the decisions and whether you can fit it in something this small, there's not a lot of room here to put much more. So, but otherwise, I have no strong feelings really.
Thank you, David. Alan.
Is this table going to be published in a document for members of the public or just for us internally? I ask that because the first one doesn't read to a layman. The second one is a much easier one to read as a layman, not knowing politics. That's why I would be tempted, if this is going in an information document for members of the public, I'd be tempted to go for the second one.
Going back to when we thought about this document, it had a number of functions. One was just to check that the actual process was lined up, chronologically correct, and so on and so forth, but also to actually communicate with members of the public.
Yeah.
So that there was one page there, and that was a restriction we placed on ourselves to get it to one A4,
Yeah.
which of course is restrictive, but then I think was quite a useful discipline to have. So full marks to David for operating between those quite strict disciplines, really. So you'd go for option 2.
I would agree entirely with Mr. Hemsley. I think that if the document is really aimed at those making complaints against councillors, and presumes therefore that's likely to be somebody from outside the organisation, the second document is a much more user-friendly way of understanding what the process is for somebody who is not versed in the minutiae of council procedure, I think. So if it is directed to those outside of the authority, I would have said that the second one was better. Though the first one, of course, is extremely clear in terms of technicalities and process. If there's room for both, please have both. If there is, however, only one, I think I would agree that the second one is the one that is the clearer and more understandable by the layman.
Thank you, Stephen.
But just reading it here, Chair, it says the decision as to whether to proceed with option 1 or 2 shall rest with the monitoring officer in consultation with an independent person. So is that taken away from what we're discussing now? That's the comment here in the write-up.
I just missed that. Sorry, Hugh, I missed that. I was just looking to see who was wanting to come online. Apologies.
Decision on whether, the decision on whether to proceed with option 1 or 2 shall rest with the monitoring officer in consultation with the independent person making his or her decision. The monitoring officer will have regard to the relative costs involved and which option best serves the public interest. That's where we're coming from, aren't we? 2, I would agree.
You ought to go for 2, the second version. Okay. Robin, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I mean, I would totally agree with you. I think in terms of the parameters that you set, I think, this is my take on it was this was always intended for a member of the public. We all know how completely impenetrable some of this stuff is, to effectively the man in the street, the person in the street. So I think, we could have both, but I think our primary objective is to have something for members of the public. And I just wanted to ask a question. Perhaps David could answer this in terms of, we were talking about the media protocols, referencing that in the document. Just to clarify our position with the hearing panels, I assume they would just be constituted as committees of the council, therefore they would be open to the media in any case. But just to clarify.
David? David Clark.
Yeah, I think there's a subcommittee of the standards committee. That's how they're formed. As to whether or not the hearing takes place in public is decision to be taken between the chair and the complainant as well. If the complainant feels that there's concern, or the chair has concerns that there's sensitive information there or expose the identity of the complainant, if it's an anonymous complaint, for example, that's been accepted by the MO as part of the process, then there could be a case to make that the hearing is not held in public, but that's a decision to be made at the hearing stage.
just to come back on that, David, I would have thought if it's I mean, obviously historically, David, I'm sure you know, when we've had hearings in the past, they've always been held in public, and actually quite a lot of people have attended. You know, I seem to remember one where the Luttrell room was full, and I would have thought surely if they're constituted as a subcommittee, then normal rules apply. So the meeting starts and then you have to take a vote to go into closed session.
Yeah, fundamentally, yes. Yes, you would have to
Yeah.
have to confidentiality or exempt information procedures in order to hold it in
Yeah.
session.
Thank you, Robert. Are you happy with the responses from David?
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments from anybody? Okay, well, it looks as if the version 2 is the one that which is the uncoloured one. And if perhaps I chuck something in on behalf of Francis, who was, as David has pointed out, was quite keen on that one as well, but isn't here. Stephen is on her behalf. Then I suggest we go with propose rather. We go with the version 2. It is intended, just to clarify that, for use by the public and to simplify things for them. So hopefully it's done that. And I know it was quite a complicated process for David to get there. Do I have a second for that? Thank you, Stephen. All agreed? Let's move on then to the media plan, which, just to remind you, was produced by Melanie Wellman in conversation with her colleague Emos at the time. And there were, again, some comments that were made in that. We've got the highlights in there in Appendix 5 on page 89 and 91. 90 and 91, sorry. Any comments, any questions that people want to raise? Stephen? You? Do you want me to come? I'll come back to you. No, it's 89 through to 91. Is it 92? Sorry. I'll come back to you in a moment, Hugh, anyway. David Strip?
No, Chair, I'm fine.
Thank you. And Alan? Back to you. I have one comment. So what we're proposing, what we are talking about is the acceptance of Stephen's comments throughout the text. There aren't a huge amount, but to amend the media plan, which is referred to in the previous document. Hugh? Are you still working your way? Yes. That's all right. No, I'll keep talking because I've got a query that one of the areas that we talked about was the last row of the document on page 92, where we felt that really there should be a record of time spent on individual complaints in order to understand, and my memory has to go back to December, two aspects. One, the cost of complaints, and two, whether we're resourced enough to keep on top of them. And we felt there was a need to record those areas. Stephen hasn't commented on that, so I'll have to have the discussion here. But Hugh, coming back to the document, you're okay, fine, thank you. So that was the comment I'd like to raise, and I don't know why Stephen hasn't commented on it, but what are the views of people around the room? Perhaps I'll start with David this time.
I think it's essential, actually. I think you need to, the potential for claims now coming forward in terms of having to, the fact that we're looking at not just, we're looking at the number of claims potentially that could come through. I think we need to be monitoring how much time is spent and what just to, as you said, to gauge the resource that goes behind it.
Okay, thank you, David. Alan?
I would be surprised if legal staff were not keeping timesheet, allocating their time to individual cases.
Okay, thank you. Stephen? You? Robin's got his hand up. I'll come back to you, Robin.
Chair, will we be putting a cost? We're going to decide a cost now, or?
I think there's additional work we'll need, as it hasn't been responded to go into this to see what's involved. But at the moment, my feeling is that we're responding to the principles of what's behind here. How we do it may be another question, which we'll have to look at another point in time. So I don't know the answer to that one. But my own feeling is that I don't want it to be ruled out because it's in the too difficult area. Because it might be that we have to look at on a down and dirty approach. I'm just going to take Robin and then David. And so, does that answer your question, or would you like to ask another one?
No, because it's very deep rooted, Chair. I mean, we have to have a voice on cost of other things to give us a sort of example. But there'll be people that will just promote a problem, and we could be playing difficulties chasing ourselves and not getting a clear answer at the end. So we've got to have a figure to say to go to.
Thank you. Robin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I kind of sort of Alan touched on it. Just a sort of question clarification from David, really. I mean, I assume the former county council, now Somerset Council, has an electronic recording system for the legal department, but obviously that doesn't, I can see you nodding, speaking as somebody who used to write that system for a supplier, I'd be very surprised if you didn't have one, because that was many years ago. But obviously that doesn't cover the sort of democratic services staff, that's just the legal team. I think it would be important, because if you think about, the two issues that I would think about are, firstly, if you get an FOI, almost certainly that's the question they're going to ask, is how much does this cost? Because that's the question everybody asks, if, the person on the street, because they're interested in, where their taxpayers' money is being spent, and it's right that they should know. And secondly, I think if we think, it is my personal view that coming down the train fairly quickly, either with this or with a future government, we're likely to see a change in the standards regime. If we think about all of the the issues that we've had at sort of central government level, I think, I would personally be astonished if we don't get a change in the next few years. And so if we don't understand what the current system costs us, how are we going to understand how we're going to resource any future system, which may actually be more onerous to administer, because it may have sort of greater levels of sanctions, etc. So I think it is important that as an authority, as a sort of a business unit, we understand, how much it's costing us and how much each complaint is, the unit cost, if you like, which is obviously a complaint is the unit in this case.
Thank you, Robin. Any other comments from anyone else? Perhaps David, you wanted to. Oh, David, sorry.
No, I agree. I agree with Robin absolutely, and the point, to Alan's point, that the legal team will be very surprised if they don't record time. But can we go back to a recent case? So there was a recent case, wasn't there, in Bridgewater, I think. Can we just go back and ask the question as to whether time was recorded on that case as an example, to see whether whether it's already being recorded? And then we might get an answer definitively as to whether time is being recorded, and if not, then we need to do something about it.
Over to David for that one.
I will need to check, because Robin's exactly right. The lawyers record their time in 6-minute blocks.
Yeah.
That's the level they will go down to, but that doesn't apply to DS officers or the administration of the complaints as well. So it will fundamentally depend on who is undertaking the initial assessment, because myself as MO wouldn't do that time recording.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be on the legal case management system. But some of the lawyers like Steve or Leslie would potentially be. It's just whether or not we need that consistent approach where we engage, where a matter moves to investigation, and those are the matters that gain the publicity, because those are the matters that tend to be held in public. And there's an external investigator engaged to assist with that, then yes, that information is there and available as to what their fee would be to assist with the information. It really depends how far you want to go. Do you want to look at room booking, catering, time spent by administrators as well as the investigators? It's not recorded at the moment down to that level of detail, and as I said, it
I think
depends
it's
on
the
who's
thing
leading it.
that, no, I don't. I mean, it can probably be simplified by saying that perhaps stage one, there's a standard sort of cost for, once the initial assessment probably say takes X amount of time, and you can put a standard figure on that. I think you just need to record the number of hours that people at different levels are spending, so you sort of get a feel for the cost. It doesn't need to be specific, and I guess, in terms of sort of room hire, room costs and whatever else, well, you can put a standard, or you almost put a standard cost for that, can't you really? But I think, it's in terms of the amount of time that people at different levels are spending, and then you can get a rough idea.
I think the challenge would be in putting a standard cost against it. Yes, we can put early rates against it. That's no problem. Different officers at different levels contributing different amounts of time. Each complaint will be different. Each complaint depends how involved it is, how complex it is, how many witnesses need to be spoken to. So a standard stage one complaint, there won't be a standard figure for a standard stage one complaint.
Oh, right, okay. Well,
But,
then, no, but it's the hours of time that people at different levels spend, because that will take account of the number of witnesses that they're interviewing and all the rest of it. I think that would be, that's a really good practice. It's a really good practice, and it happens in most professional organisations now. Time record. So.
Okay, thank you, David. Two Davids, thank you, David. I think if I try and summarise where we've got to so far, the principles we feel is important that we actually do capture these for reasons, the two reasons I particularly identified earlier on. One is which to know whether the resources are adequate for the job, and two, to identify where the costs are going. So it's a matter of staffing up as well as knowing where the money's been spent. The difficulties, I guess, are in the actual how that system will work. I, for one, wouldn't want to create a huge monolith of administrative culture that would take longer than the actual complaints themselves. And what I was going to suggest, really, that is if we feel that this is an important area to address, is perhaps to ask David and his team to look at how that might be done. And it may be a combination of, certainly I'm taking other areas that I worked in, of standardised costs against specific costs, so on and so forth. But if it actually takes more time to do than the benefits of it, then I suppose underlying that is the thing one has to be aware of. The final thing I'd say is that all of what we're doing, of course, is subject to continuous review anyway and continuous improvement. So, for example, if we go back to the agreed schematic, if we found that was better in another form in a year's time or so, I'm sure we'll be coming back to say, well, time has told us that we could improve on this. So perhaps I've got a proposal to say to David before I make a firm proposal as to whether the team would like to look at the situation and what it might look like.
Thank you, Chair. If you're asking me to consider the proposal and come back to this committee with options as to how we can record time spent on complaints, then I'm happy to do so.
Okay, you captured that much more clearly than I did. So the proposal is that we would like to go ahead with some sort of understanding of the costings, and that David, we'll ask David to go and look with his team at the likely structure that might involve. That's the proposal. Do I have a seconder? Hugh, thank you. All in favour? Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, David. Item 5, David, haven't we?
Yes. So we're not adopting the media plan at the moment.
Good question.
I think
Can we adopt it with a caveat on the final row that that's work in progress, and perhaps that will come back to our forward working plan?
I think what we can do, Chair, is adopt it as it stands at the moment, in the knowledge that I will be returning to the committee with a report or proposal on time recording, and then we can update the media plan accordingly based on the response of the committee to that proposal.
I'm happy to propose that, Mr. Chair.
Seconder? We're happy with that? Right, so we've got an action there to pick up. So we've adopted, it's item 5, I think, Steve, isn't it?
Appendix 5, 5. Yeah.
No, the whole item we've adopted, haven't we?
Yes.
Excellent. Fine. Appendix 3 was the media plan?
5.
Right, thank you.
Costs.
Do you have a feel for timescale on that one, Dave?
Happy to commit to bringing something back to the next meeting, Chair.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, let's move on to item 6. Priority Group 1, and thank you to Alan for all the work again he's done on this, and I'll invite David to present his report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Apologies for splitting the work of the priority group into 2 different reports, but I just found it quite challenging to make the recommendations for 2 separate pieces of work. And I know Steve found it challenging when I sent sort of almost 2 identical reports to him for the agenda. But effectively, this was the query of the priority group looking at the potential of co-opted members to the standards committee sitting on the subcommittee hearings panel. So Alan did some research with Cornwall, Dorset, Wiltshire and Buckinghamshire councils looking at their arrangements and proposals, and you will see within the report that Cornwall decision making is limited to full Cornwall Council members. Similarly at Dorset, they don't have a standards committee but a subcommittee of the Audit and Governance Committee, and again, co-opted members are not eligible to sit on that subcommittee. Within Wiltshire, while they do have 4 co-opted members onto the committee as a whole, and subcommittee and co-opted members were eligible to sit on the subcommittee, they did not have a voting right within that. Wasn't clear within the response received, but certainly if they're non-voting members of the committee, then they cannot be voting members of the subcommittee. And Buckinghamshire, they had no co-opted members on there at all. So there was a variety of arrangements there within the councils that have been consulted. There was no overwhelming consensus as to the correct approach or the approach that was adopted by most. So I think really the recommendation back to the committee is to consider what they wish to propose as a change. So the options available, as I've tried to summarise under 4.1, is to make a recommendation that COPTA members of the Standard Committee become eligible as full voting members of the Standards Hearing Subcommittee, but we would have to introduce that voting right to the parent committee to allow them to do that on the subcommittee. Second option was that COPTA members could be eligible to be advisory members of a subcommittee hearing panel, but with no voting rights. Fourth one is to make no changes at all, and the third one, just jumping back, is a slightly different approach where I think the whole basis of this was to give a little bit more flexibility and agility to the subcommittee so that they had a larger number of members to be able to draw on. And one way of addressing that is actually to increase the size of the committee itself. So you have more Somerset councillors sitting on the parent committee. So you have a bigger body of representation to draw on for the membership of the subcommittee itself. So that, I believe, are the options that are open to the panel. Pass it back to yourself, Chair.
Thank you, David. So we've got the four options that David has come up with there, and I'd just like to pick up any questions, discussion about that. I think there's quite a considerable decision to be made there. It may require some time outside to work it up. So perhaps we just work around the room. I'll get to Robin first because he's outside the room, but he's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I thought I'd kick off because probably I'm the person who feels most passionately about this. So I'll lay my stall out now and everybody else can sort of chip in afterwards. Obviously, we are in a position where we're now unitary and we're an amalgamation of 4+1, but as Somerset County Council, as a convention, they always had COPTA members on hearing panel, operating as David says, in just carrying forward their role from the parent committee, in that they have no voting rights. They're just advisory members, just bringing their sort of experience, their worldly experience, their sort of county experience to the party to be listened to and to be in the room, but to not have a vote. My take has always been on COPTA members on this committee, the parent committee, that I don't think there's any need to sort of give COPTA members voting rights, because if you think about it, we are almost unique within what was the county council and now the Somerset Council, but very largely we operate by consensus. There's very, very rarely a vote, and a vote is more an administrative process than anything else. Things are done by consensus, and that in my experience over the years, the chair has always given the COPTA members a voice, as you're giving me a voice now, and elected members have always listened to COPTA members' voices and opinions. So I don't voting rights on the parent committee and likewise on the hearing panel, but I do feel extremely passionately that there should be COPTA members, as there has always been, on the hearing panel. So yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Robin. We're sort of referring to it as the hearing subcommittee now, because it's got a few names, but we know exactly what you're talking about. Thank you very much. David.
So I did make a contribution to Alan's comparison with other councils, but I think I might have missed the cutoff, so you might not have seen it. So I was just trying to sort of capture the reasons for and against, and the reasons for were openness and accountability. So I think, and having that independent view, effectively the view of the man on the street. I was wondering about sort of political bias as well, because I think in the Constitution, it says that members of this committee are not based on political background. So there's no, you could have all people of one party or people of one feeling. So, the fact that there's somebody external might help to sort of temper that any political bias. As Robin said, it was county council practice under previous standards legislation. And I think the point as well is that standards procedures are increasingly being scrutinised, and inclusion of a co-opted member might aid that accountability. I think arguments against is that you're already conferring with an independent person. So is there a need for another independent person effectively? And then, I can see the need, as David suggested, that if you have more members, it would be more flexible. But I just wonder, I've never attended a hearing, so I don't know how it feels about sort of being intimidating, that if you have more than the 3 people that are currently there, is it that much more intimidating for the person? So those were my thoughts.
Thank you, David. Just to pick up one of your points there before I move on to Alan. The current proportionality is that there is a member from each party here. Yeah, which is different from all the other committees, which is based on the number of votes, not the number of members. Sorry, David.
Yeah, so the Standards Committee has waived political proportionality. Otherwise, of the 5 Somerset councillors, you would have 60% would be Liberal Democrats as the current administration, and then distributed evenly amongst the other remaining opposition parties until those 5 positions are filled. But the decision that was taken was it would be better and more equitable to have representation from all the one representation from all the political groups.
I didn't really quite understand then what the waiver meant. I thought that the membership, the councillor's party to which he belonged was effectively waived altogether. There was no consideration, but there is a member from each party. That's right. Okay, misunderstood that.
Alan.
Thank you, Chair. I do like 5 elected members, 1 from each, and I would not want to see it altered from that. I think that gives the Standards Committee a lot of credence. I would also like to see co-opted members available to sit on hearing subcommittees. Whether we have voting rights, as Robin has said, everything today has been done by consensus. In fact, you've only got 3 of you who can actually propose second and vote on it today. So
yeah.
It has to be by consensus, otherwise we 2 probably walk out. So yeah. Those are my thoughts anyway.
Over to the other side, Stephen.
I'm right in thinking, I think that at the moment the co-opted members of this committee don't vote. They're here in an advisory capacity. It strikes me therefore as logical that if you are seeking to maybe extend the membership of the subcommittees, that we do that on the same basis, that we have co-opted members but not with voting rights, in the way that I think we're rather assuming that Wiltshire probably does. But in line with previous county council practice, as well as I understand it, that would make sensible and logical sense and roll forward the practice of the parent committee into the subcommittee. So I would have thought that was perfectly logical, and that makes me feel much in favour of bullet point 2 on 4.1.
Thanks, Stephen. Hugh.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, let's get it right. We're looking for extra membership, really, for subcommittees, because we're short. Now, the only way around that is to take on 5 new members from the council as it stands now. So we've still got the same political bias or equal now. I would say like we are now, independent, conservative, and your liberal one couldn't have it better. But we mustn't go away from that. This is what's brought it on because of the subcommittees. There's only so many people putting their names forward. Though there's 15 of us, it seems there's only 2 that are available, and I find that really, really hard to find out why this is happening. But I personally, picking up the point that David made about the size of that committee, that there's more than 3 there. That's not what it's about. As I said, it's a replacement for one. It's not making it bigger. We don't want another opinion because that'll confuse it, and that'll make it fall with the chairman having the casting vote. Another pressure point on poor chairman. So I say we stay as we are, but we then increase our membership from the council, another 5 members, because I have been to these situations when they've been a political one in this very building, and if you'd only had 1 set of people, that person could have lost. There's no doubt about that. And so you say we're not political. Politics would come into it when there is individuals who want to play that card, especially when they're in high positions. So I don't want to be insulting to you, David. I'm giving you a fact. I was there in the audience, and it was quite difficult for all of us to be there and see what was happening. So certainly, I don't like the idea of co-opting people that aren't councillors, only other than what we're doing now. I would not like to see them in a courtroom with us. It would cause confusion because perhaps a barrister might even challenge that person and say, hang on, you're not a councillor. What are you doing here? You're a member of the public. I don't know the law on that, but that's the thing.
Stephen.
Sorry, Hugh. Could I just ask, in the light of Hugh's point, if co-opted members were actually sitting on standard subcommittees before, hearing subcommittees previously, were they ever challenged?
I'll have to seek background to that because I certainly wasn't around when it was happening.
Yeah.
I would, sorry, Chair. I would presume it would be referred to what was constitutionally appropriate. You know, if the constitution of the time of a previous version of the county council or previous version of the constitution stated that the standards committee sub-hearing panel and the process and procedures associated with that co-opted members of the standards committee were eligible as voting members on the hearing subcommittee, then there is no right of challenge. It would only be if we departed from what was our adopted procedures within our constitution in terms of reference that the challenge would be legitimate.
So always being anxious to keep Hugh's blood pressure as low as possible. Probably doesn't need to worry too much about that at this stage. So you don't need to fret, Hugh. It probably won't happen.
David?
Yeah, it's just I think fundamentally, Councillor Davies' observations are correct, that the driving force behind this report was to increase the available body of councillors to sit on a subcommittee, on a hearings panel. At the moment, that hearings panel is made up of 3 councillors, which need to be Somerset councillors. There are only 5 Somerset councillors on the committee itself, so it's a pretty small body when you're trying to coordinate availability, location, times for that subcommittee hearing panel to meet. That was the challenge. That was the reason behind this report being considered, or the options being considered. But in saying that, hearing panel subcommittees don't happen that often. Just happen to have one in the first weeks of the new administration, but going back, it's certainly amongst 2 of the legacy district councils, that was the first one we'd had in approximately 10 years. Can't predict the future, can't say what's going to happen and come forward in terms of the level of complaints, and obviously one of the other agenda items talks about the volume that we've received first couple of months of this new authority, but that was a situation. Just a bit of context and background.
Thank you, David. Yes, I was just going to refresh where we started from, and David's done that very accurately anyway. Really, it's the we also have a duty to respond to, as we've all just looked at the code of conduct, the complaints process, in a certain timescale, and so therefore, if we are limited by just the sheer numbers, 5 of us here, 3 then selected, in order to prevent us from achieving those timescales, then that's an issue we've got to address. But I probably raised this situation because it was the first one. It was in weeks, as David has said, and I felt, and we've got a document later on we can look at, but I felt there could be a lot more coming down the line, which we weren't aware of at the time because they were coming through as legacies from district councils and arriving on the Somerset Council's desk. So it was that sustainability and how we'd respond in that situation, which we've all talked about. Personally, I think I'm totally supportive of the political balance situation. I think that's crucial. I felt that one way of doing that was to extend the voting position to co-opted members, of which we're one short of anyway, that's currently available. Paul isn't here today. So we've got one additional to put in there. So it was how we address this issue of sustainability, really. The one I hadn't thought of, which you came up with, which was to have another 5 balanced council members to come on board. And I think that would unbalance the committee at the moment. And perhaps if those are the options, the only options that we can come up with, looking at David's 4, one of them was no change, I would probably plump for number 4, which is to make no changes to the current arrangements, and to see how we go forward on that. But it was really just a sustainability issue that I felt was important, and I think we ought to keep this under review. But let's just pick up any last points, David.
Can I just ask whether the sustainability issue came from the last proceedings? You know, the fact that you've only had this, this one proceeding is the one that you've presided over, and there haven't been many more before. I mean, were there any learning points from that? And is sustainability, was it difficult to make the arrangements for the hearing because of councillor availability members?
So, from my perception, chairing it, there is another person, independent person that's there as well. So there's 3 voting council members and 1 independent person. I'm going to ask Andrew, because he was involved with trying to get the dates together, and they did move. And you've got to think about the barristers, if they are present, plus the person who's made the allegation, the complaint, and anybody else who needs to be there as well, the independent person, the investigating officer. Andrew, how easy was it?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's difficult because you are only working with from a pool of 5 members to take part in that hearing. But I think picking up from what David said, this was the first hearing for around 10 years, so they are very far and few between. Yes, there was a bit of pain from my side of things in trying to get 3 members together and then linking in with the investigating officer, the independent person, and obviously the complainant and the councillor in question. So yes, there is that, but I think we may not see. There's potential we may not see another one for another period like that. So I suppose it's something just to keep under review for the next time that this comes up. So otherwise you do end up with a sort of subcommittee that's more of members co-opted and various other people there than perhaps, and that can become slightly more intimidating.
Can I just come back on David's point about
David, then Alan.
Yeah, just come back on the point about the number of incidents of complaints in this first since April. Have you noticed more complaints coming in than previously? that relate to sort
We're
of
going to talk
particularly
about
parish
this.
councils and town councils.
We're going to talk about this later on in the agenda, but if David would like to address.
Just to say we can pick it up in the next agenda item, but yeah, the reason why there is an item on the agenda is just to alert the committee to the fact that we have had a bit of a surge, a bit of a spike in complaint numbers in comparison to what we as monitoring officers of the legacy councils predicted. We thought we might have if the trajectory keeps on going in the way it's gone in the first sort of 2.5 months, then you will smash that.
David Allen.
Chairman, am I right in thinking that any change to our constitution needs to be made by full council, and full council meets every 3 months?
But yeah, 5 times a year. Next meeting is July, and then September following that.
What I'm thinking, Chair, is that if there has been an increase in the number of complaints received, therefore there could be an increase in the number of subcommittee meetings to be heard. Would it be prudent for us to recommend to councils that we change our constitution in accordance with the relevant bullet point, non-voting co-opted members, but that officers be advised that we would prefer elected members to serve on hearing panels, subcommittees, sorry, until such time as they cannot convene those meetings successfully without using co-opted members? It gives officers the flexibility that they may need, bearing in mind the time it would take for council to approve a change in constitution.
I'll ask David to respond to that, but I will make one other point that one of the early issues was that we didn't have a vice chair and only the chair could sit on the hearing subcommittees, and therefore I was obviously a limitation in this situation, no other of course, in terms of how this could be organised. Hence the reason we talked about having a vice chair, and we voted on that, and that was brought forward and agreed to, adopted at council. So I'll pass.
Yeah, I think just a little bit concerns about how we'd apply that, because I think it's very much a binary situation. You either have voting rights or you don't have voting rights. You either are eligible or you're not eligible. So to have a situation where you are eligible, but you're kind of second choice, if you like, I don't think would necessarily work, and it would be open to challenge in itself. You know, why does it say within the constitution that co-opted members are eligible to sit on sub-panel hearing committees, but they're never selected?
We also have the independent person who's there as well, who comes along, appears and disappears. Stephen, sorry.
I'll answer anything, Mr. Chairman. I'm conscious of the fact that there are 3 voting members here this afternoon, and all 3 of us have said something different. We clearly need to move it forward, and I think it's probably better that we make no changes than make the wrong one, or one that we feel uncomfortable with. And so, just in the interest of moving it on, I will support for now making no changes to the current arrangements, but that we do keep it under review so that we can come back and look at this again. I'm very mindful of what Hugh says actually about having additional members of the committee, and I think that may well be a way forward, but I suspect that we've got to think about some of the further implications of that before that might be done. I am still of a mind to think that having the co-opted members as members of the subcommittees would be helpful in a non-voting capacity, but my overall sense is that we've still got a way to go. We've still got some thinking to do about this, and under the circumstances, it would probably be better to make no changes for now, but be mindful of the fact that something will probably need to be done in due course.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Any other comments before I try and Hugh?
Chair, can I just make the point that when we're doubling size, okay, so if it happened in Sedgemoor, if it happened in South Somerset, wherever, they would have dealt with that with their own team. So you're talking a perhaps 5 in each. So that's a lot of people in each district added up. And also in the olden days, when I was tried and shot, it wasn't done by the locals, it was done by people from away. I mean, say, Chappie to chair came from Yorkshire. I mean, and I don't know whether the government paid for all that. I really wasn't on that side. But certainly it was a different situation then. And we had nobody on that committee. They were all foreigners, from anywhere in the country. So that must have cost a bomb, quite frankly. And it did last 2 days. But no, seriously, because we've doubled in size, it's got to be. And I'm sorry to repeat myself, sir, but I was the vice chair of this committee years ago when Mr. Councillor Goat from Glastonbury was on it. And in those days, we chose the chair. But then when it all changed over with the new party coming in, I would have to say not your party, they then brought in their own man. But we had a fabulous chair. I was proud to serve underneath him. And so it was different then. And
Okay,
so
thank you.
we've got a chance to increase because we're doubling in size. We're
Yeah.
not asking for the world.
Yes, I think your comments about volumes, which we'll come back again to later on, are really relevant to the fact that we have got 5 times the workload potentially to address. So we know that's coming down the line. I think, and we need to be able to respond. My concerns in my own mind at the moment is that Alan's point that he raised is that we can't react very quickly to that if the situation does prove untenable because of the need to refer it to council. So I'll ask David whether there is any quick response. I'm certainly minded at the moment because of the conversations that have been around the table to think about the no change situation at this stage and to keep it under review because I think the volumes are looking later on we'll look at, but they are increasing and we could imagine that that could be the way forward. We expressed concerns, if you cast your minds back to when we were writing the documents for the Code of Conduct, that perhaps 5 monitoring officers would be about right, if not maybe a little under, for the new authority. They've actually effectively got that with 1 monitoring officer and 4 deputies, am I right? 4 deputies. But that was just thinking about the situation of 4 into 5 into 1. So I think we've been aware of this for a while, but I'm not sure whether we've got an answer to the process so far. But David, I raised a question about how, if we decide to make no changes at the moment, how quickly can we respond? Should it be proved that we're not going to reach the deadlines we set ourselves in terms of handling these complaints?
Yeah, it's correct to say that it would be a full council decision to change the terms of reference of the standards committee. We do have a meeting in July, we have a meeting in September, and next one December after that. So I think inevitably for complaints that do progress to a stage 3 situation where a subcommittee hearing panel is required, it does take a little time. It's not something that would happen, within a matter of weeks. We would be talking a matter of months, more than likely, by the time the assessment's done. The complaint received, that initial assessment is undertaken, that's fed back to the complainant and the subject counsellor and the independent person. Their observations are then taken into account before it's finally published, and then again, if consensus or agreement can't be reached, it's only at that stage we'll be looking to move to stage 3. So there is a little bit of time lag and to get to that subcommittee hearing process.
Thank you, David. Okay, I don't understate the need for us to be able to respond to people's complaints by any means, and I think that's the issue that we're all trying to address here and respond in a way that doesn't take absolutely geological timescales. So I'm going to try and sort of pull together where we are. I certainly I don't wish to understate the contribution of co-opted members, and the only ones I know are the ones in this room, to the proceedings of this committee, therefore their potential to contribute anywhere else. The framework, it seems to me, or the structure, is the one that we're struggling to get round, and possibly in a short timescale. So my proposal is that we go with no change to the current arrangements, but keep the situation under review. And I think part of that review must be if suddenly there's a tsunami comes down the path into David's and his team's lap, that we may have to respond very, very quickly indeed, and think about how we do that at that moment in time, because the credibility of what we have to offer within our code of conduct is based upon this, really. And in my own experience, there are quite a lot of people out there who don't feel they've been best served by the support of higher authority, like that. So we have some ground to cover, as well as to show that we can actually not just write policies but deliver them. So that's my proposal. Do I have a seconder? And I've got to look to my right. Stephen, thank you. In order of consensus, we keep the consensus going. Any other comments from David or Alan as to that way ahead? Thank you. So we're happy with that as a proposal, and we keep it under review to bring that forward. So thank you very much. Let's move on to item 7, the priority group 2 and 3. And I'm going to ask David if he wouldn't mind taking these separately. So the model of code of conduct adoption by city, town and parish councils as one item, and then the review of the Officer Code of Conduct as another. And thanks again to Alan for his research and the time and effort he's put into that. It's not only just that he's scoured the current information that's available, he's actually sifted that and put it forward in a very much easier way to read than it would have been initially. And I think you've had support of other people who you might like to reference at some point anyway. So we need to build on that. So David, perhaps we could take the what is item 7.1 first, if that's okay with you?
Yep, so the work of priority group 2 was to look at the model code of conduct adoption by city, town and parish councils. So just as a bit of background and context, all the 5 legacy higher tier authorities adopted the same code in 2022 in preparation for vesting day. At the same time, the monitoring officers also produced a model code that was suitable for adoption by our city, town and parish councils. So there was some minor changes between the code that's available for that cohort compared to the upper tier authorities, removing references to scrutiny, for example, because that's not a parish, city, town or parish council function. But the changes were relatively minor in comparison to the 2 codes. In preparation for that model code available to city, town and parish councils was co-produced and promoted with the Somerset Association of Local Councils. And I think in roundabout April last year, a letter was sent to all of our city, town and parish councils promoting the code, providing them with a copy, and suggesting that it's good for adoption, and it would be of the benefits that would accrue from only having a largely similar single code across all the tiers of councils. So that's some 14 months ago now. And as Chair referenced, Alan's done some sterling work in looking at the level of adoption amongst that cohort. And really it's appropriate time to revisit it. I think we're looking at, of our 278 or almost 280 parish councils, I think there's 70, is that right, where we can't get clarity on what their code is, and certainly not the model code that's been adopted. So overall, that's a pretty good return, I would suggest. But rather than this committee doing some further work on that, what I've suggested is that as that original communication came from the monitoring officers, we follow that up again, as proposed, just by means of a short online survey to that group of councils, just asking them to confirm the latest situation, and asking them to provide a link to their code as well, which will be of benefit to us in terms of any investigations or assessments we do for code of conduct complaints, so that we've got instant access rather than having to trawl about the internet and their websites, or asking them to provide a copy at that stage when it arises. So that's the proposal before the committee, is that we follow up that promotion by doing a second round of promotion, and we do it by means of an online survey.
Thank you, David. Going to start with Alan, David, if you don't mind, just as he was the man that's done a lot of work on this, and ask for your thoughts.
I'm quite happy with David's suggestion, especially the link to their code of conduct, which I haven't got, but obviously the ones that didn't respond, I've gone through. Some of them are difficult to find, so be warned. Can find them. some of them.
Thank you, Alan. David Strip.
Yeah, no, I was just going to make the point that I'm a councillor on Kingston St Mary Parish Council. We adopted the new code last year and just renewed the adoption a month ago. And I'm sure she has the clerk. I reminded the clerk to tell Salk that we had done that, but it's showing here as a blank. I think we may find that quite a few other councils are in the same position, where the news just hasn't filtered through properly to Salk. So I think you might find that there are more people that have adopted it than
Right. So
72 than counted.
So optimistic, the actual numbers. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, David. Stephen.
I think the course of action that Mr. Clark has recommended is a very admirable one, certainly speaking for the parishes that I represent, 21 of them. Any that are missing at the moment or we're unclear about, I'll do my best to chase up.
Thank you, Stephen. Hugh.
Chair, if you know, just before we started, I brought this to your attention, and I noted Coombe Flory and Monk Silver having signed up, and I was very anxious with the local community networks. We're going to be dealing with these people, and yet they're not playing the same game with us, joining forces. So I think whether I meet with these people on the 13th of July, I don't know whether I'm going to be there yet. We've had our pre-meeting, but I don't know, because I've got two meetings that day, and the organisers of the local community network said, "Oh, we'll make everything work in with you people." Well, this is the second one, and the second goal I've scored, because I've got problems again. I might not be able to get there. But I did go to the first one at Stagursey, which was very well attended from Bridgewater side, and Kilburn and Holford were very good. They were there, so that was very pleasing. But of course, my team, Watch It, Willerton, and that, have joined up with Minehead. So we've got one hell of an area all the way down to Coombe Flory. See what I mean? And I'm checking on Stringston, which is part of Stagursey area, but they are a parish, but they don't meet very often. So I'm going to do my best to go and visit when I can find out who to go and see. And then the other one I highlighted, Chair, was Bridgewater Without. I mean, let's say Bridgewater's got everything, haven't they? So where's the without part? I don't know. So anybody can help me with that. I'll get all the councillors that are there and see if we can get some movement for you.
So your point is, Hugh, that you're concerned they're not playing ball or don't appear to be playing ball in terms of supporting one code of conduct.
Yeah.
But of course, the survey would attempt to tease that out in terms of where that applies. I mean, I'm sure all of us, when we've been visiting, I've only got 6 compared to Stephen's couple of 224, was it? Sorry.
Well,
Nearly
plus a couple of paragraphs.
doubled it. But I've been mentioning to them about the situation and have done occasions. So thank you, Hugh.
Jack, I just want to remark, Taunton Town, which is coming council when it's they're not on it yet, so they might be on it. But that's in April they became a councils. That's a major one. That takes in Stable Grove and places like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's important to get that.
Thank you. Robin.
Yeah, I don't know who would know this, or perhaps the LCN team, but when I attended on behalf of Shepton Mallet, a local town, we went down to the sort of LCN working day that they had down in Yeovil before vesting day, and there was a discussion then that the participants in the LCNs would be asked to sign a sort of participation agreement, and that would detail effectively the things that the Somerset Council would promise to do and to give, but also it would, in signing up, the people who attend the LCNs would agree to do certain things in return for the LCN. And I just wonder if we have gone down that route of having something to sign, whether you could add in a unified code of conduct to that.
David, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think you just need to be a little bit cautious that the role of committee and the role of Somerset Council is one of promotion and encouragement, because we can't enforce anything. And if the city, town and parish councils are their own bodies, their own sovereign bodies, they need to adopt a code of conduct, but they certainly do not need to adopt the model code. So again, while it's one of encouragement and promotion, I think we just need to be a little bit cautious in terms of cracking any whips or that we may have. It's more of a carrot to use rather than a stick, I think.
Okay, yes, so we're very much in the mode of carrot at the moment. Not using the carrot as a small stick either. So David's proposals then are before us. Can we just take a view on whether you support those, please? Starting with Steve. Yeah. You? David, Strip?
Yeah.
And Alan. Okay.
Just for information, Taunton Town Council have adopted the LGA one, just checked.
Well done.
Taunton Town have adopted the LGA.
Well, I think this is something that we're going to have to keep a watching brief on, and at some point maybe there'll be an element of a slightly flexible stick or something like the if there's a contract being adopted between the LCN situation, then perhaps there is an element of two-way process, and what they get and what we get. We're all we, of course. So, David, what sort of timescales do you want to work on to survey your proposal to motion?
I've asked my colleague on my right to try and to reach out to see what business support we've got to do that online survey. It's not a bit of the imagination, but a bit of technical nous, which is me and Andrew. But we know the people to speak to. Once we have that set up, then I can committee know side of this certainly in advance. If it's ready and prepared and ready to go out prior to the next.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think the ideally it would be, because the next meeting is in August. Sorry, David.
Sorry, just a quick point, that coming back to the issue of time recording, it would be useful to know whether it takes longer to, or how much longer it takes to deal with a claim that is not based on an LGA code of conduct, whether whether there's additional time having taken because you're dealing with something separate.
Probably not. You know, we need a code. A code is a code, depending upon its content. Sometimes it limits the assessing officer if provisions that they're anticipating would be in the code are not in the codes. So they can find it challenging to hang potential breaches or concerns off of pegs if those pegs are not there. In terms of timing, it would extend the process.
I think my own experience of the only hearing subcommittee that we've had is that that it must take more time because basically you've got to get your head round another code of conduct, which is not one you're conversant with. And I was conversant with the one that we were working with, and not so much in it takes that long to read because I think it was only a piece of A4 that came through, but it's just understanding the implications sitting on a panel, sorry, subcommittee, in terms of that when you've already got your head around another situation. So I don't know how one would put a cost on that, but certainly it needs a conversation to say, well, in the what if scenarios I've got in my head, how do we deal with this situation? So, okay, thank you, David. Coming back to timescale, would it be possible or even practical to do it within the next couple of months? I mean, we're actually going to meet at the end of August, so we are talking about a couple of months. And ideally, I was wondering if we could do it before then we'd have some feedback for the next meeting at the end of August. But my question is that practical?
I would hope so. Had any conversations yet, Andrew? But I would probably, and I would anticipate giving parishes 3 to 4 weeks to respond to the survey, and we could send out reminders and initial dates. So we would be tight for the end of August meeting. We can get it out within 2 weeks and then give them to respond. It's pushing it for agenda publication, but we can certainly provide an update.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be useful, David. It's just to keep this thing moving forward, and also, but the other thing I would say personally is not to skim on the time and lose the quality, if you like. So I think that would be overriding. Just got a couple of things I want to write on the action plan now. Find that things were slipping back in terms of their timescales, then we need to flag that up. David's perspective early on, so we knew what we had to do, perhaps drag it back onto line.
All I was going to observe, Chair, is that obviously the options for the committee in terms of changes are there within the report, whether it's increasing the size of this committee or recommending that co-opted members are eligible to vote. It could be that work is done between now and then within one of the priority groups to decide which approach they would favour. That might allow us to just get a little bit ahead of the curve so that we know what the recommendation of the report.
Yes, good. Far away from anybody else, I did notice that. David? David, did you? No, okay. Oh, sorry, yes, thank you, David. The Officer Code of Conduct, over to David.
Yes, again, thank you, Chair. Prior to Group 3, I'd looked at undertaking a review of the Officer Code of Conduct and made a number of observations and recommendations. Those have been passed on to the Service Director for Workforce as it applies to officers. He has embarked to share it with the trade unions at one of his regular meetings, just so that they're engaged and gather any observations or comments they may have. Following receipt of those comments, then I'll back to the committee with formal recommendation.
Thank you, David. Yes, just to get the ball rolling here, I think this was an item that we originally commented back on either December or January, certainly quite a long time ago. And I think one of the things we need to sort of make sure in the future is that when we feedback comments as a committee that somebody responds and says, yes, they've got them or something along those lines, and then we get the feedback from those, because I think we could have dealt with this quite some time ago. I haven't got any issues with David's recommendations at all, but I think it's the response time, because here we are 6 months probably on from that, and I may be quietly out of with the timescales. So let's just pick up any comments around the room then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just said to David earlier in the before the meeting started, I'm happy to attend a meeting with unions if the Service Director there feels it might be appropriate, as I've started the ball rolling on this one. I will sit and be quiet unless I'm asked to speak. Promise.
Right, no. David, any thoughts on that? Sorry, Ron.
I will pass the offer on to my Service Director colleague.
I think that's a very generous offer, Alan, and it's something where hopefully we can be seen to be working in collateral with everybody that's involved in this process. David Strip. Thank you, David. Nothing from Stephen. You, Robin. You haven't got your hand up, so I probably caught you unawares there.
Yeah, no, nothing from me, Chair.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, David, for that feedback, and we look forward to, presume, would be back to us in August, our August meeting. Just to remind you, while that's in my mind, that the date of that has been moved backwards in order to accommodate my holiday. So I might as well say that earlier on, so any sort of boos and yars can be got out of the way pretty quickly. No, not as far as that, just France. Thank you, Hugh, for asking. So moving on to David, I've covered everything now. I haven't missed anything this time. Future business. Really, I throw this one open to the committee, perhaps. Excuse me. The attack of the biscuit, I think. The starting perhaps with Hugh.
Board, quite frankly, that's enough to keep us going, I should think.
Thank you. Well, that's a fairly comprehensive, pithy response. Stephen.
I'll forbear to comment, Mr. Chairman, bearing in mind that Councillor Nicholson will be carrying the business forward, not me.
Very, very generous of you to say that. Thank you. David.
80, sorry, predicted 80 for the year, and you have if the current trend continues, you'll have 180. 30 over this period. You know,
If you
what that accounts for in terms of resource and.
Thank you, David. Alan. Okay, I probably should have prefaced this by saying that, I mean, priority group 1 has effectively done and dusted its stuff when we see, apart from the review situation. 2 has decided where it's going. We're waiting for that, so there's a watching brief there. 3 basically is, again, we're just having feedback. So it doesn't appear there's any great amount of work. I'm sure there must be something that Andrew's got something.
Yes, Chair, I think it was at the first or the one before Standards Committee when I brought forward a report on the Register of Gifts and Hospitality received. So that will be something that will need to come back to the August meeting for you to look at.
Thank you, Andrew. Is that something that we ought to, we can at this stage pass on to a group to look at, or is it waiting the report in August?
It'll be ready in August, and it'll just be the standard report that just sets out the gifts and hospitality that have been received in the previous 6-month period.
Thank you, Andrew. So if we look at the, we've got the continuing work of the P1, which is basically coming back with any elements. I think we were looking at the action plan to remind myself. Major plan report on costings. So I'm going to propose that P1, the membership of P1 continues to keep an eye on that. David, myself, Francis. Item 6, basically no change there. Be updated on the speed response needed. That would come to P1 as well. Then we move on to P2, which is to look at the responses from the survey. I hope everybody can hear me, by the way. I'm turned away for the August meeting. Is that a fair assessment? Got going forward, have I missed anything? David?
Sorry, can I just ask, in terms of Andrew's point about the gifts register, does the monitoring now as monitoring officer have a responsibility now for monitoring parish and town councils gift registers?
All I was going to do is just reiterate the point I just previously made, Chair, is whether priority group 3 want to do some proactive work on the membership of the subcommittee or membership of the parent committee as to what the preferred option would be, because obviously we've decided to no change at the moment, but to keep under review. If we do need to move quite quickly in response to the volume of hearing panels that need to be convened, it would be helpful to know if that is by means of increasing the size of parent committee or promoting voting rights for co-opted members attendance at subcommittee hearings of the options that are set out within the report.
Currently coming under P2, I think, isn't it? P3 is just the officer code of conduct, which is Francis, Robin and Alan. I'll come back to you in a moment, Robin, once I've clarified this. Yes, I think that's a good idea. Let me just come back to Rob before we.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah. There's I just sort of raised these two. They're not, necessarily specific to this agenda item, but I noticed it wasn't an AOB. So just 2 points really from me. First of all, after our last meeting, I emailed into the office just to ask for a sort of updated organisation chart, just so we as a committee can see where, and I think at that stage when I emailed in, we hadn't actually had the interviews and the reorganisation, so we didn't know who would be MO, etc. But we clearly do now, just so that as a committee we can understand, you know, who are the team, who's doing what roles. Obviously, we now have an MO, deputy MOs, etc. Who's in the team. I think I personally would find that very useful. And as I said, I didn't have a reply to my email. And secondly, probably more leading on to the point when we talk about the hearings, but related to hearings, obviously, as you say, it happened at short notice, the one that we have dealt with. I found it, just on a personal level, a little bit difficult to deal with because I had people asking me locally about it. And actually, we heard about it in the local paper rather than hearing about it perhaps as a committee, as an alert coming to us via email, or you know, something online that we can check. And I think just from a personal point of view, that puts me in a difficult position if somebody asks me about some work of the committee and the local paper is more informed than I am. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, I'll perhaps ask David to comment. I've got a comment I'll make myself once David has commented on that. It's a difficult area, but let's pick that one up.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a fair observation. The subcommittee was held in public, so it was the agenda was published and promoted, and that would have gone to all members. Obviously, the co-opted members wouldn't have been included within that email distribution. So I'll make sure we pick that up moving forward if the similar situation arises.
Does that answer your concern, Robin? Because I think it's an appropriate one.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, David.
Thank you, Robin. So looking back through the work that we've got coming forward, is there any pre-work? I don't think there was on the gifts and hospitality. That's going to come to August. The monitoring of complaints really will come down to, I guess, back to P1 because that's the area they've been working on. So that's David, Francis and myself. I'll just capture this one in total for a moment, David, if I may, if you bear with me. I was going to suggest that therefore we ask or consider asking priority group 2 to look at the committee and subgroup composition. And this is for discussion, not for diktat. And also to keep a brief on the survey and the process with the model conduct adoption. Which would be the survey. There was something else you mentioned, David, which I'm not sure that I noted down at the time. Was I covered it?
I believe so, Chair. Yeah.
FP3 out because the code of conduct for officers is really done, and well, unless it comes back to us at some point in the future to review then. And if there is work to be done out of the register of gifts and hospitality, I think that would be suitable to look at that then. David, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that in terms of the work that P2 will be doing, in terms of reviewing the standards committee, you know, bearing in mind the number of complaints, surely the work for that sits with officers, and can a recommendation be made that, you know, do you feel that the team that you have is big enough to cope with that work that they do? And should a recommendation come from the standards committee that perhaps we should be looking at employing more officers to deal with those complaints rather than increasing the size of the standards committee?
David?
I think the vast majority of complaints will be dealt with at stage one in informal resolution. And if this sort of spike or surge continues, then that would be the officer resource that would be required. So in terms of the member adaptations to the composition of the subcommittee or the parent committee, that's specifically in relation to subcommittee hearing panel. And there, that puts us in the position of trying to predict how many of the stage one complaints will move to stage 3, which is difficult to do at this stage.
Does that answer your question, David? Okay. So we reallocated the tasks, a lot of ongoing. We haven't got a P3, just got P1 and 2. That's the, I'll write that up when we've completed today anyway on the action plan. And it doesn't look like we need to have any meetings of the groups before our next meeting. Is that a fair assessment? Thank you, Hugh. Okay, let's move on to Code of Conduct complaints, item 9. David's raised a question here about whether we need to move into exempt session. I don't personally feel we do if we're just going to discuss the public document. So if everybody's happy with that, and we'll just have to take David's advice on whether we're straying outside the bounds of what we can talk about publicly. But let's pick that ball up and run with it. Just be aware of that particularly we're not here to talk about specific cases, but to look at the numbers. And that should keep us safe, I think. Over to David. David's just going to present the report, eh? Robin, were you on the previous item or are you on this one?
No, on this one, I was just going to say, Chair, that under the previous Somerset
Can
County Council.
I hold you until David's done his report? Then I'll bring you in first.
Yeah, of course you can.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely spot on. Only if we stray into specifics would we need to go into confidential session. If we were just looking at numbers and volumes and trajectories, then we're happy to present this report in public and to have the debate in public. We've already touched upon the content of this report already. It's just really by means of an update for the committee. We're sort of 12 weeks into the new authority now. In preparation of vesting day, the 5 monitoring officers had looked at their code of conduct complaint volumes and those that had progressed to formal complaints across the 5 legacy authorities and made a prediction of about 80 to 100 per annum that we could expect, taking into account the removal of the district tier of authorities, but also the increase or the doubling in the number of former county councillors, now Somerset councillors, from 55 to 100 and 110. So that's what those predictions were based on. It's simply just to let the committee know that sort of 12 weeks into the process, we're touching upon 40 complaints now that we've received. So we're going to knock our predictions out the park if that trajectory continues. There was a number of legacy complaints from the district councils that have carried over, and one from Somerset County Council as well. That transitioned into the new authority, were submitted prior to vesting day and continue to be assessed after vesting day. And we've had, so there was I think 11 complaints that transitioned or carried over. And since the 1st of April, we've had over 30 code of conduct complaints come into the process as well. So yeah, we're probably on the books at the moment. There's high 30s in terms of complaint numbers. So it's just really recommendations just for the Standards Committee to note that we've had that little bit of a surge, and we're trying our very best to work our way through that.
Thank you, David. So we've got 11 legacy and 13 new. So the legacy is the area that I guess we would hope to gradually be worked through. So the 30 is probably more symptomatic of a trend on the new authority. A lot of assumptions going in here. Which if we carry on as we are, I think David Strip's figures took us to about 120, 180, was it? 180. So it brings us back to the situation we've talked about already, which is why I wanted to bring it ahead of that particular document, but I think everybody's read it anyway, so it could influence their thinking or comments. And I'm not sure we still have an answer to how we respond to David coming back to us in August and saying we've got 60 now. I mean, some of the, hopefully there'll be some of the 30 will have been addressed, but you know what I mean, in terms of exponentially increasing, so on and so forth. So in some ways, personally, the figure of 11 legacies is rather less than I anticipated we would get, but that was only my guess. The reason that guess was rated to was because I thought, well, there's been a lot to do in the last year and people could well have easily taken the foot off the pedal with that one. So they'd pop into a new authorities to rule of law. David Strip.
Apologies for keeping answering, asking questions, but can you just confirm, is it the process for sort of analysing complaints to see if there are trends and to see, you know, whether sort of there are training programs needed to, you know, whether councillors just misunderstanding things and whether, you know, is there information made available to the standards committee about what the complaints are about and whether part of this committee's work should be, you know, suggesting ways that we can overcome those and stop them happening at source?
Not proactively. We are recording what the nature of the complaints are and where that complaint is coming from, whether it's a member of the public or councillor against councillor, for example. So that information's there and available, and the nature of the complaint. You know, what the alleged element of the code that's been breached. So we have that information. So that'd be quite easy to pull together for the committee. In terms of the training, yes, that's something we keep under constant review, and I think there's hopefully a piece of work emerging between ourselves and the Somerset Association of Local Councils and the Somerset Local Council Clerks as well, to see what kind of co-produced or conjoined training we can offer moving forward, if there are trends, whether it's on declarations of interest or disrespect or bullying or wherever it might be. And with some of those themes, there's work that's been produced by the LGA as well, especially on abuse and intimidation and dealing with social media activity as well, and commentary. So there's a whole package of training and resource that's available for authorities there that we can promote. And in my last authority, just prior to vesting day, I kind of was made aware of the respect and civility pledge that had been produced and promoted, and again I took my turn to promote that to all my parish councils, asking them to consider adopting it. So in terms of themes, there's stuff we can focus on, and there's training we can deliver. I think there's more of a concerted programme that we need to pull together in conjunction with the other organisations or agencies that I mentioned that we need to put.
Thank you, David, and apologies to Robin rather, because I held him back and then didn't come to you first. Apologies. You've just been to Glastonbury, have you?
Yeah, I was going to say I put in the chat when just before we started. Yeah, but it said the chat was muted. Yeah, so that's the reason I'm not there. Yeah, we were a bit late getting out. We run the family camping field, and it was all a bit more work this year getting out than previous years. So yeah.
If I look sympathetic, it's a mistake.
So yeah, a couple of points. So what I was going to say before we started, previously on the committee at Somerset County Council level, the county solicitor was an attendee of the meeting, so that she could provide, obviously in our case, legal guidance and advice to the committee in terms of complaints and also issues, as we discussed, whether we need to go into closed session or whatever. I'm just wondering whether that's something the committee wants to consider now that we obviously have more than one solicitor, if you like, because we've got a cohort of solicitors. Obviously, Mendip had theirs outsourced, but you know, there were some in-house ones that I'm sure have been taken on board. So that was just something to think about. And then really just a question for David. So the 30 ish that we've had, what can I ask what the breakdown is between town and parish and unitary complaints?
Yeah, so I think under 3.3, I say about a quarter relate to Somerset Council. The remaining 75% are related to town, city and parish councils. There is a caveat with the Somerset Council number, is that 7 of those 9 or 10 complaints are related to two incidents. So we've got multiple complaints about the same incident. Right.
Okay. Yeah, because obviously, I mean, I think David made the point, didn't he, about are we monitoring trends, etc. I mean, if you said to me we had, you know, we've got, you know, 8, 9, 10 complaints effectively about what would have been county councillors, that is a phenomenally high number compared to what we've received in the past. You know, if you think about that, if you looked at the statistics for the former Somerset County Council Standards Committee, you know, the level of complaints were marginal, at least almost zero, almost all of the time, from year to year. So to actually have a sudden spike, and I think it's interesting that you say that they all relate to perhaps 1 or 2 individuals and 1 incident, because I think if they didn't, that would be setting off enormous alarm bells in my head that you've suddenly got, you know, a 1,000% increase in complaints against county councillors, which would just be, I think one would have to ask the question why, and really do a piece of work on, you know, quite why we suddenly got that level of complaints. Notwithstanding, obviously, we've got 2 reps in each division now, but you know that still wouldn't account for that. So I think it'd be interesting moving forward. I think I personally would be interested to see if they are related to 1 or 2 individuals and 1 particular incident, how much, quite how you deal with those, and quite whether you break a lot of those down as vexatious, and not carry a lot of them forward and consolidate perhaps into 1 or 2. So I think it'd be interesting to see how those figures break down, and you might be able to knock a few of them out of the park quite quickly by effectively consolidating and agreeing with the complainant. There's essentially 1 or 2 complaints you carry forward, and the rest you effectively strike off the books almost straight away.
Thank you, Robin. Any other comments, David? Yeah, I think there's I'd also just remind everybody that the recent press release about Debate Not Hate, which has been put out. I don't know how many people have seen that from the council. It's probably worthwhile copying people into that. I don't know that you could do that, David. But there's a recent cross-party promotion about Debate Not Hate, signed by all of the parties involved in the situation that, well, basically it says what it does on the tin, really, and the attacks that, not just in the this authority, but I think across, it's fair to say, across the country. So there is I think possibly, be careful of my words here, a more litigious situation that we're coming into, and that would be indicated in other areas of life that we're all involved in. And the second thing, perhaps inadvertently, by promoting a code of conduct and advertising and encouraging the public to come forward, maybe we've been successful. So I don't know which of those it would be, but it occurs to me that to keep an eye on this situation, I wonder whether it's possible for David to, again, not in an elaborate way, but just in terms of the numbers, keep us up to date on a more frequent basis than waiting through to August. I'll just ask his thoughts on that, please.
Happy to report on whatever schedule the committee wishes. It's not overly onerous. I think you just need to be mindful that the numbers don't necessarily relate to upheld complaints as well. So the vast majority of those numbers could be dismissed with no further action or not upheld. But yeah, happy to give a kind of rolling update on a monthly basis of complaints that have been received and resolved, those that are no further action, those that are local resolution, and those that are not yet resolved.
Yes, that'd be useful, David. I mean, it was, I'm fully aware that, but what we're looking at the moment is we've got more coming in the pipeline, if you like, in the, whatever you want to call it, pipeline or production line, or conveyor belt, and we need to sort of recognise that as well. David, I'll come back to you in a moment, and certainly a monthly report back from me would be useful. I think we need to see the areas you've looked at, which is to complaints dealt with, for example, no further action, and then if we just had the bald numbers coming in, we'd think, okay, there's a mountain here, and nobody's actually doing anything about it at all, which is not going to be the case. So I'd leave it for you perhaps to think about how we balance off that input-output situation. But I'll just stop and go back to David Strip.
Sorry, just one thing. I think would be really useful to have that information coming through. And coming back to Robin's point, the fact that, you know, very rarely did we hear of complaints being made. You know, the numbers were very low, and also the number of whistleblowing incidents as well. So I think it would be really useful to include whistleblowing. And because the numbers were so low, you know, it just makes you wonder whether the process is right, you know, whether the process is clear enough, whether people are able to make those complaints or whistleblow, you know, without intimidation. So that would be useful.
What sort of whistleblowing were you thinking of? Any thoughts about in the unitary authority? Yeah. Or in.
Sorry, excuse me. No, I'm guessing in parish councils, would you be whistleblowing, or would you be just making a complaint against another councillor? I'm not sure, but I thought of whistleblowing being specific to the council, but possibly not.
Yes, I really need to get my head around that one. I'm not sure whether whistleblowers are complainers and vice versa. David, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we just need to be a little bit cautious, because whistleblowing is a standalone, separate process. Probably doesn't fall under the remit of the Standards Committee itself.
It did before. Did it? Yeah, we had a policy. It may have changed over unitary authority. Not addressed it here, but it was one of the policies that came in last year, which may have gone to Constitution and Government.
Yes, yeah, certainly we've got a standalone policy for it.
Yeah.
But I don't believe there's a role for the Standards Committee in terms of assessment or reporting or investigation of whistleblowing. But I'll revisit that. Yeah.
It was particularly it was raised in the previous incarnation of this committee, because Councillor Munt was part of the committee, and she was the chair of the National Whistleblowing group or something.
That fits in the remit of this committee anyway, and probably I would just coming back to the complaints breakdown, I'd sort of leave David to come up with the reasonable sort of fields that you would want to put together in terms of in, out, no further action, that sort of thing, to reflect an accurate but not an onerous view of the current situation that you're trying to cope with yourself and the other four 4 MOs, deputy MOs? Yeah, okay. And perhaps you'd like to come back to us and say, well, this, or maybe we just come back with the analysis, and we'll see how that goes from there. Anything else that, any questions or comments that people want to make about the item 9? Page 111. Otherwise, we've worked through the agenda. Thank you very much, gentlemen and ladies. Robin, sorry you couldn't be here, but we'll regard that as a self-inflicted wound by going to Glastonbury.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you all for coming today. And we'll see each other again at the amended date, just to remind you again, at the end of August. I think I did make a note of that for those who haven't. 30th. Thank you, Andrew. 30th of August. And I think that one is at 2 PM again. Just to remind me, Steve, are they all at 2 PM from now on? Are we?
I think they are.
Okay.
I should have sent calendar appoint.
You have, yes.
I should have sent calendar appointments to all the committee members and co-opted members fairly recently, just so. I think there's one next May, which I haven't done, but just so you've got them to add to your list.
Okay, thank you to the officers for being with us today and for providing the support we need. And I will complete the action plan. And Steve's going to do it this time, Steve Taylor. It's done. Right, okay. We'll have a competition then. First past the post. Well done, Alan. I haven't finished writing it up yet. So anyway, meeting.